Inside the unforgiving walls of Hawthorne Penitentiary, survival means everything. Ethan Carter, a fiery redhead with a quick temper, and Marcus Bell, a towering stoic man with strength to match, never expected to find anything beyond violence and despair. But when they were forced to share the suffocating space of Cell 26, something extraordinary happened. In a world where emotions are dangerous and love is forbidden, their bond became a rare light in the darkness. Yet, in a place ruled by violence, their connection was a risk neither could afford. When chaos erupts and fire consumes the prison, Ethan and Marcus are faced with an impossible choice: fight to survive or embrace their love, even if it means their last moments will be together. Their story is one of defiance, sacrifice, and a love that refused to die. The iron gates of Hawthorne Penitentiary groaned as they slid open, revealing a labyrinth of concrete walls and barbed wire. Ethan Carter clutched the strap of his duffel bag, his emerald eyes scanning the desolate yard where groups of inmates lounged, muscles taut with tension. He had been in fights before, but this was different. This wasn't a bar scuffle or a drunken mistake. This was survival. A guard barked orders, prodding him down the narrow, dimly lit corridor. Ethan swallowed his pride and stepped through the doorway of Cell 26. The heavy clang of the door shutting behind him sent a shiver down his spine. He wasn't alone. Sitting on the lower bunk was a man whose presence seemed to fill the room. Marcus Bell barely glanced up at first, his chiseled features set in an expression of calm indifference. His dark skin gleamed under the flickering fluorescent light, and his broad shoulders spoke of a man who had seen more than his share of battles. "You knew?" Marcus asked, his deep voice resonating in the small space. Ethan nodded, his fiery red hair catching the dim light as he threw his bag onto the top bunk. "Yeah, guess we're stuck with each other," he said, his voice edged with defiance. Marcus's eyes flicked up, locking onto Ethan's. "Name's Marcus. Don't make trouble and we'll be fine." It wasn't a threat, but a statement of fact. Ethan bristled, but said nothing. He wasn't about to let anyone think he was weak. The silence stretched as Marcus returned to his book, the faint sound of pages turning the only noise in the cell. By the time the lights dimmed for the night, Ethan lay on the thin mattress of the top bunk, staring at the cracked ceiling. The air was heavy with tension, every creak and shuffle in the hallway a reminder of where he was. Below him, Marcus's steady breathing was the only thing grounding him in the suffocating darkness. The next day, Ethan ventured cautiously into the yard during recreation time. The clusters of inmates grouped by race and gang affiliation were impossible to miss. Marcus moved through them with an ease that unnerved Ethan. His towering frame and quiet confidence seemed to command respect, if not fear. "Stay close," Marcus murmured as he passed Ethan, his voice low enough that no one else would hear. Ethan wasn't sure if it was a warning or an offer of protection, but he wasn't about to argue. He had barely taken a step when a wiry man with a scar running across his cheek blocked his path. "Fresh meat," the man sneered, his companions closing in behind him. "You look like you'll be fun." Ethan squared his shoulders, his fists clenching at his sides. "You want to find out?" he snapped, his temper flaring. Before the scarred man could respond, Marcus was suddenly there, his massive hand gripping the man's shoulder. "Walk away," Marcus said, his tone calm but laced with steel. The scarred man hesitated, his bravado faltering under Marcus's glare. With a muttered curse, he backed off, dragging his friends with him. Ethan exhaled, his heart pounding in his chest. I had it under control, he muttered as Marcus turned to leave. Marcus shot him a look over his shoulder, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Sure you did. That night, back in their cell, Ethan couldn't help but break the silence. Why'd you step in today? Marcus shrugged, leaning back against the wall. Can't stand bullies, and I don't want a dead cellmate. Ethan chuckled despite himself. Fair enough. For the first time, the tension between them seemed to ease. As they talked, Marcus's stoic exterior softened just enough to reveal glimpses of the man beneath. He wasn't just a brute surviving in prison. He was sharp, thoughtful, and carried an air of quiet resilience that Ethan found both intimidating and intriguing. By the time the lights went out again, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected to feel in this place. A flicker of hope. He wasn't alone. Not completely. The days at Hawthorne Penitentiary blurred together in a relentless monotony. The sun rose over the cracked concrete walls, but inside, time seemed frozen in a perpetual state of tension and survival. Ethan and Marcus settled into an unspoken rhythm, navigating the chaos of prison life as a reluctant partnership began to form. Their mornings started early, the sound of guards barking orders and steel-toed boots echoing through the halls. Ethan quickly realized that Marcus was a creature of routine. Every morning, without fail, he'd drop to the floor and power through a set of push-ups, his muscles flexing with precision. Ethan, lying on the top bunk, watched out of the corner of his eye, careful not to get caught staring. You could join, Marcus said one day, his voice breaking the silence. Ethan snorted. I think I'll pass. You're already making me look bad. Marcus chuckled, the sound low and genuine. Suit yourself. Just don't expect me to save your ass every time someone corners you. That comment hung in the air, a reminder of the near fight in the yard. Ethan wasn't used to relying on anyone, and he hated the idea of being seen as weak. But Marcus's presence had been a shield, one he was starting to appreciate more than he wanted to admit. By the time they made it to the yard for recreation, Ethan had decided to test the waters. So, what's the deal with you? He asked as they walked side by side. Marcus arched an eyebrow. The deal? You don't seem like the type to get caught up in this mess, Ethan said, gesturing vaguely to the chaos around them. Groups of inmates huddled together, their sharp eyes watching every move. Marcus shrugged. Same story as everyone else. Wrong place, wrong time. Made a choice I couldn't take back. Ethan pressed further. Family? For a moment, Marcus's stoic mask slipped and a shadow crossed his face. Got a sister. Haven't seen her in years. She was a kid when I came in. Ethan nodded, sensing this was as much as Marcus would share for now. Yeah, I've got no one out there either. Guess that's why I ended up here. The conversation didn't last long, but it was enough to plant a seed of trust. In a place where vulnerability could be a death sentence, they were beginning to see each other as more than just cellmates. That night, after the final head count, Ethan lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. You ever think about what you'd do if you got out of here? He asked, his voice cutting through the darkness. Marcus was quiet for a moment before answering. Sometimes, but it feels like another life. Doesn't really matter now. It matters, Ethan said, his tone softer than usual. Even if it's just a dream. Marcus didn't respond right away, but Ethan thought he saw a flicker of something. Hope, maybe, in the way Marcus shifted on his bunk. The next morning brought the first real test of their alliance. While waiting in line for breakfast, an inmate Ethan recognized as Reggie, a wiry, mean-looking man with a permanent smirk, decided to stir trouble. "Hey, Red," Reggie called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "You hiding behind your big friend over there? Thought you had some fire in you?" Ethan turned, his jaw tightening. "Why don't you find out?" Reggie's smirk widened as he stepped closer. But before Ethan could react, Marcus was there, his towering frame a wall between them. "Walk away, Reggie," Marcus said evenly, his voice calm but deadly. Reggie hesitated, his eyes flicking between Marcus and Ethan. After a tense moment, he raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, big guy. Just having a little fun." As Reggie sauntered off, Marcus turned to Ethan, his expression unreadable. "You really need to work on your self-preservation skills." Ethan grinned despite himself. "What can I say? I like living dangerously." Marcus shook his head, but there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. Back in their cell that night, Ethan finally broke the silence. "Thanks for earlier. I mean it." Marcus shrugged. "Don't mention it. We're in this together, whether we like it or not." Ethan smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened the edges of his normally sharp demeanor. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something he thought he'd lost: connection. The walls of Hawthorne Penitentiary were still as unforgiving as ever, but for Ethan and Marcus, a fragile bond was beginning to form, one strong enough to withstand even the darkest corners of their broken world. Weeks passed, and the unspoken bond between Ethan and Marcus grew stronger. Their partnership, forged in necessity, began to resemble something deeper, though neither dared to say it aloud. Hawthorne was a world where vulnerability was exploited, and affection was a luxury no one could afford. One afternoon in the yard, Ethan found himself watching Marcus as he worked out with a makeshift barbell. The sun cut through the gray clouds, casting shadows on Marcus's carved frame. Every movement was precise, his muscles rippling with strength and control. Ethan caught himself staring, his breath hitching in his throat. "You good, Carter?" Marcus asked, his deep voice breaking the moment. Ethan shook his head quickly, playing it off. "Just thinking how I'd beat you in a push-up contest." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching into a smirk. "You're welcome to try. Just don't cry when I crush you." The banner was light, but it carried an undercurrent neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Ethan wasn't used to this feeling, the way his chest tightened when Marcus smiled, or the warmth that spread through him during their late-night conversations. Back in their cell that evening, Ethan's mind raced. He knew better than to let his guard down, but something about Marcus made it impossible to resist. "Why do you always do that?" Ethan asked suddenly, breaking the quiet as Marcus leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. "Do what?" "Act like you've got everything under control, like nothing gets to you." Marcus chuckled, the sound low and deep. "You think I've got it all figured out? Newsflash, Carter. I'm just as screwed as everyone else in here." Ethan tilted his head, studying him. "You don't show it." "I don't have the luxury of showing it," Marcus replied, his tone softening. "This place eats you alive if you let it." Their eyes met, and for a moment the walls of the cell seemed to fade away. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest, and he opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The silence stretched, thick with tension, until Marcus finally looked away. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's gonna be rough." But Ethan didn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, his thoughts spinning. There was something between them, something real, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. The next day brought more chaos. During lunch in the mess hall, a fight broke out between two rival gangs. Trays clattered to the floor as fists flew, and guards rushed in with batons raised. Marcus pulled Ethan out of the fray, shielding him with his body as the chaos unfolded around them. "Stay close," Marcus barked, his voice firm. Ethan didn't argue. They navigated the pandemonium together, their movements in sync. When the dust finally settled and the guards restored order, Ethan realized how much he had come to rely on Marcus, not just for protection, but for something deeper. Later that night, as they sat in their cell, Ethan finally broke. "Why do you keep doing it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus frowned. "Doing what?" "Putting yourself in the line of fire for me. You don't have to." Marcus stared at him for a long moment before answering. "Maybe I don't, but I want to." Ethan's breath caught, his heart pounding in his chest. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. "I don't know what this is," Ethan admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "But I know it's not nothing." Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. "Me neither. But whatever it is, we'll figure it out." For the first time since Ethan entered Hawthorne, he felt a flicker of hope. Not just for survival, but for something more. The fragile bond between Ethan and Marcus grew stronger with each passing day, but Hawthorne Penitentiary was no place for vulnerability. The walls had eyes, and the slightest hint of weakness could mean disaster. Rumors started to swirl, carried on hushed whispers and exchanged glances. Reggie, the wiry inmate with a talent for sniffing out secrets, seemed particularly interested in Ethan and Marcus. His smirk followed them everywhere, a silent reminder of the danger that lurked in every shadow. One evening, as the cell doors clanged shut for the night, Ethan sat on his bunk, his back pressed against the cold wall. He could feel Marcus's eyes on him, though the older man said nothing. "You notice how Reggie's been watching us?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, he's looking for leverage." "What do we do?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Marcus leaned forward, his broad shoulders casting shadows on the wall. "We don't give him anything. Stay cool, keep your head down. The less attention we draw, the better." Ethan nodded, but unease gnawed at him. Their connection was no longer just between them. It had become a liability, a target. The next day in the yard, Reggie made his move. He sidled up to Ethan while Marcus was on the far side of the yard, lifting weights. "Red," Reggie said, his voice oily and mocking. "I see you've got yourself a bodyguard. Must be nice, having someone like Marcus watching your back." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Reggie?" Reggie grinned, leaning in closer. "Just a friendly conversation. You know, people talk. They see things. Wouldn't want the wrong rumors getting around, would we?" Ethan's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You don't scare me." Reggie chuckled. "You should be scared, Red. In here, a secret like yours can get you killed." Before Ethan could respond, Marcus appeared, his towering frame casting a long shadow over Reggie. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus's voice was low, almost calm, but there was no mistaking the threat in his tone. Reggie's grin faltered for a moment before he recovered. "No problem at all. Just having a chat with your friend here." Marcus didn't move, his eyes locked on Reggie. "Walk away." Reggie hesitated, then raised his hands in mock surrender. "All right, big guy. No need to get worked up." As Reggie retreated, Marcus turned to Ethan. "You okay?" Ethan nodded, though his heart was pounding. "Yeah, thanks." Back in their cell that night, the tension was palpable. Ethan paced the small space while Marcus sat on the lower bunk watching him. "We can't keep doing this," Ethan said finally, his voice filled with frustration. Marcus frowned. "Doing what?" "Pretending this isn't happening," Ethan said, gesturing between them. "Reggie knows. Others will too. What if he decides to do something about it?" Marcus stood, his presence filling the cell. "Then we deal with it. Together." Ethan stopped pacing, his eyes meeting Marcus's. "You make it sound so simple." "It is," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We can't control what people think, but we can control how we handle it. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." The sincerity in Marcus's voice sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. For a moment, the walls of the cell seemed to disappear, and it was just the two of them. "You're not what I expected," Ethan said softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Marcus tilted his head. "What did you expect?" Ethan shrugged. "A cold, stoic guy who doesn't care about anyone but himself." Marcus chuckled. "Maybe that's who I used to be. But you have a way of making things different." The vulnerability in Marcus's words left Ethan speechless. In a place where trust was a luxury, they had found something rare and precious. But as the weight of their reality settled over them, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their fragile connection was a flame flickering in the wind, vulnerable to being snuffed out at any moment. That night, as the prison fell into silence, Ethan and Marcus lay in their respective bunks, each lost in thought. They didn't speak, but the unspoken promise between them was clear. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days following Reggie's confrontation were tense. Marcus and Ethan kept to themselves, but the eyes of the prison seemed to follow their every move. Reggie, emboldened by his knowledge, started to spread rumors, his smirk growing wider each time he caught their gaze. One evening, during a routine head count, Marcus leaned close to Ethan. "We need to deal with Reggie before this gets worse." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening with anxiety. "What do you mean by deal with?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "Send a message. Make sure he knows we won't be pushed around." The opportunity came during lunch. Reggie sat alone at the end of a table, his cocky demeanor unchanged. Marcus approached, towering over him, and whispered something Ethan couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it wiped the smirk off Reggie's face. That night, Reggie left them alone. For now. For the first time in weeks, Ethan and Marcus felt a semblance of safety. Their late-night conversations grew longer, their silences more comfortable. "You ever think about life outside of here?" Ethan asked one night. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes. I'd open a gym. Teach kids to fight the right way. Not like this." Ethan smiled. "I'd probably screw it all up again. But maybe, with you, I wouldn't." Marcus's hand brushed Ethan's for the briefest moment, a gesture so small it could have been accidental. But it wasn't. That night, as the prison slept, they sat closer than ever, their unspoken connection stronger than the walls around them. Chaos erupted without warning. A fight broke out in the yard, and within minutes, it spread like wildfire. Guards struggled to regain control as inmates turned on each other. Ethan and Marcus stuck together, moving as one through the chaos. They fought off attackers, their bond unspoken but unbreakable. "We need to get back to the cell," Marcus shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm. As they ran, Ethan tripped, but Marcus pulled him up, his strength unyielding. They made it just as the lockdown alarms blared, the steel doors slamming shut behind them. "You okay?" Marcus asked, breathless. Ethan nodded, his chest heaving. "Yeah, thanks to you." Marcus's gaze lingered, his eyes filled with something deeper than relief. The fire started in the kitchen, a small spark that quickly grew into an inferno. Smoke filled the halls, and the screams of inmates echoed as flames spread. Locked in their cell, Marcus and Ethan banged on the bars, shouting for help, but the guards had evacuated, leaving them behind. "It's no use," Marcus said, pulling Ethan close. Ethan's heart pounded, tears streaming down his face. "This can't be it." Marcus cupped Ethan's face, his expression steady despite the panic around them. "If it is, we're going together." As the flames closed in, they held each other, whispering promises of love that would outlast the fire. The flames consumed everything in their path, but in the heart of the inferno, Marcus and Ethan clung to each other. "I love you," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I love you too," Marcus replied, his arms tightening around him. As the smoke thickened, they closed their eyes, their foreheads touching. In their final moments, they found peace in each other's embrace. Their love, forged in the darkest of places, burned brighter than the flames, promising an eternity together beyond the walls of Hawthorne. What did you think of this intense and heartbreaking story of love born in the most unlikely place? Ethan and Marcus lived something as rare as it was impossible. A love that defied violence, fear, and even death itself. They showed us that even in the darkest moments, the light of true love can shine through. Did you enjoy the drama, the conflicts, and the breathtaking ending? Were you captivated by the story and its characters? Rate it from 1 to 10 and let us know what stood out to you the most. What would you change or explore further in this story? And of course, are you ready for another emotional journey like this one? Share your thoughts below.